Moments ago, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, a targeted military operation to roll back the Iranian threat to Israel's very survival. This operation will continue for as many days as it takes to remove this threat.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu making good on his repeated threats to strike Iran and try to cripple its nuclear program. Israel is now bracing for retaliation after Iran's news agency said the attack killed several people, including the head of the country's Islamic Revolution Guards Corps. Bloomberg's Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner joins us now from Tel Aviv. Ethan, a lot of things have happened in a very short time. What's the very latest?
Well, I think you've summed it up well, Haslinda. We are here waiting for retaliation. The Iranians have now vowed to do so. We know that there are at least several thousand or a couple of thousand ballistic missiles in their possession. Last October, when there was an exchange between Israel and Iran, 130 ballistic missiles came. About 30 got through. So there is a reason to assume that some damage and perhaps some death will occur in Israel. It must be said, nonetheless, that the biggest concern over these recent years about an attack on Iran, that there'd be also an attack from Hezbollah in Lebanon. But Israel took out much of Hezbollah's ability in the fall, and so that's reduced. And Israel also has a lot of bomb shelters. Buildings are filled with them. So people are being ordered to stay close inside and not go to school, not go to work, and so on. So the airport is closed. We shall see.
Well, Israel had said it wouldn't move unless talks fail. And talks are meant to happen only over the weekend. So what happened here? Why the preemptive strike?
Prime Minister argued in that clip that you just showed a piece of that Iran had been moving secretly and rapidly toward developing a weapon, that they have enough enriched uranium, highly enriched uranium, for what could be 9 bombs, he said, in the coming months. That there's a bunch of stuff going on that they've been hiding from the world. That in essence, what he was saying is the negotiations with the United States were a ruse. And behind closed doors, they were actually preparing a major attack on Israel. Israel couldn't wait any longer, and it decided to preemptively attack. That is his argument.
Where are we in terms of talks between Israel and the U.S.? The U.S. has said that it was a unilateral move by Israel. Are they in conversations right now?
I assume that they're in conversations. I'm quite sure that they talk. The level of disagreement is something that we need to explore as we go forward here, because I think President Trump said he didn't want Israel to do this, but it didn't seem, frankly, that he was objecting all that vigorously. So I think it could be a bit of a mixed message. I don't know. And it also, at the same, Trump had been saying several things simultaneously. On the one hand, he was saying we don't really want to see an attack. On the other hand, he was saying Iran is not acting the way we expect them to do in these negotiations. We're not very encouraged or optimistic. Something big and terrible could happen. We don't want to see it, that kind of thing. It's very, very hard to gauge Trump based on what he says publicly. So I don't know. But my sense is that this is not a big break between the two countries, between the United States and Israel.
Ethan, thank you so much for that update. Israel Bureau Chief Ethan Bronner in Tel Aviv. And as we wait to see how Iran will retaliate, the escalation poses a major foreign policy crisis for President Trump and his administration. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg senior editor Bill Ferris. And, Bill, we know that Trump has said repeatedly he still wants a diplomatic resolution.
Yeah, he's made it clear he's committed to trying to find some sort of a deal. It hasn't been an easy process, but he has sent his special envoy for the region, Steve Witkoff, on, I think now so far 5 meetings with Iranian officials in Oman, where these meetings have been brokered. They haven't been able to reach a breakthrough, and the president has expressed some frustration. But his goal has been throughout this process to get Iran to agree to not enrich uranium, not to have any kind of nuclear weapons program. And there at least have been discussions on that. What the president has been clear about, I think, and even ran on in both of his elections, has been this idea that he doesn't want to get involved in more Middle East wars. What we saw earlier this year when the U.S. ramped up attacks on the Houthi rebels in Yemen was that it ended up being a fairly short-lived process after it was made clear that the U.S. wasn't able to do a lot of damage. The U.S. certainly showing, as Ethan pointed out there, that it wants to keep itself at least arm's length so far in this latest decision by Israel to go after Iran. It's not clear to me how long the U.S. could stay out of that process. But what Trump really doesn't want to do is find American forces engaged in yet another Middle East conflict that could drag on for months or years to come.
Well, we have just a response here from Iran's Khamenei saying that Israel will undoubtedly receive response. Of course, this is a message of retaliation from Iran. Let's get an assessment. Retired General Wesley, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and now Chairman and CEO of Wesley K. Clark and Associates. General, good to have you with us. What are you making of the situation here in the Middle East? It does seem like Israel is making the calls now. I mean, the U.S. seems to be sidelined.
Yeah, I think Israel looked at what was happening in Iran. I think they read it, as your previous guests said, as a ruse. In other words, the Iranians were going to talk and talk and talk as they developed a nuclear device, and then decide at the end whether they got enough out of the Trump government to not actually complete the device. But they've been standing pretty firm, and so I think Israel decided, let's just get this over with. Let's not wait and have the waffling back and forth of a diplomatic discussion while Iran completes its nuclear weapons and puts us in danger. Now, Iran has weakened air defenses, but they did strengthen their ballistic missile guidance systems. So these missiles are potent, and Israel had to decide when it did the strike, do we first try to take out their retaliatory capability, or do we go right in after the nuclear weapons and the command and control? And so they decided to take the risk on Iranian retaliation. The Iranians have said previously that they would bring the United States in if there was any military action. So I know what Secretary Rubio put out. That statement said we had nothing to do with it. Of course, maybe that's true, but Israel and the United States have worked together for a long time. Iran now has to decide, does it retaliate? If it does it bring in the United States? And what are the consequences of doing that? So President Trump does not want a war. He said that. But also he does not want Iran to have nuclear weapons. So I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has taken the decision away from President Trump at this point.
General Clark, last year when there was this tit-for-tat back and forth between Israel and Iran, we saw that many of Iran's missiles and drones were shot down before hitting their targets, and we believe that the U.S. was involved in helping Israel coordinate that defense. Reading the U.S. statements now, do you think the U.S. will be there if there is, as we expect, a retaliatory attack from Iran? And given the degradation that happened last year, how capable is Iran of retaliating at this point?
Well, I think there's some unknowns in this. First of all, we don't know exactly how Iran may have improved its ballistic guidance systems, but we do know that Russia is in with a strategic relationship with Iran, but also we know that Israel has a relationship with Russia. So we don't know whether these guidance systems have actually been improved or actually worsened in the process. Neither does Iran. And then there's the question of the United States. So if missiles are launched, it's going to be a little late to say if you're on a U.S. base in the region, well, don't worry. I don't think they're coming here. So my guess is that there will be some mid-course intercept by U.S. assets in the region, regardless, because it'll be too early to know exactly where they're targeting.
We just have a headline here, General. Israel launching another wave of attacks in Iran, and that's according to the Army radio. A link to that, General, I'm just wondering how much damage can Israel make on Iran's capabilities, nuclear capabilities. We know that a lot of the sites have been dispersed, throughout the country, and a lot of the main ones have gone underground. So how much real damage can be caused?
Israel can do quite a bit of damage, but can it eliminate the entire Iranian nuclear program? It seems unlikely unless there are troops inserted on the ground after several days or 3 weeks or so of continuous strikes. Israel has a strong air force, but this is a long way away. And so these aircraft don't have a lot of loiter time over Iran. They're going to go in, they're going to make their penetration, drop their ordnance, turn around and leave. Israel's got good intelligence capabilities, and they may have drawn on previous U.S. intelligence assets. But there are nuclear sites scattered all over Iran, including storage in the far southeast of Iran, to make it difficult for Israel to strike it. So this is going to be sort of a continuing effort of strike, assess, strike, assess, strike, assess by the Israelis. And on the part of the Iranians, it's going to be receive it. How much do they hurt us? What can we do next? Behind all this are the Iranian people, and they've been suffering a lot through sanctions. They're not that happy with the regime in Tehran. There's a strong sentiment there that maybe that government needs to go. So if this continues, these strikes continue, especially if the United States comes in, you could look at a collapse of the Iranian government entirely and have a lot of disorder in Iran, a lot of military components, including nuclear components, scattered around.
Right.
So this could become a bigger issue, not just a series of strikes.
Netanyahu has said that the attacks will continue until the threat is eliminated. What will that take? What kind of weapons? And you talked about if the United States gets involved, what would it take for the U.S. to get involved?
Well, I think we don't know exactly what the threat means. The threat is nuclear, yes. Is it ballistics with chemicals? Is it a dirty bomb? Is it simply the fact that the Iranian regime and the Ayatollah keep calling Israel to be destroyed? Is that the threat that has to be eliminated? So there's some ambiguity there. Now, Israel has a good stockpile of weapons, spare parts, ordnance, everything they need for a few days. But it won't be long before they're coming back to the United States and saying, we need help, we need more, we need air-to-air refueling, we need spares, we need jamming capability, we need more intel assessments of what we've done. And the United States will have to decide how much overtly it's going to be involved.
General Clark, last year when we saw the strikes and counterstrikes between Israel and Iran, it seemed like everything was calibrated very carefully to allow for a potential de-escalation. Are we in a different world now, given the statements we're getting from Israel in terms of having that exit ramp, I suppose? And you mentioned earlier the risk to U.S. forces in the region. Where exactly are U.S. forces most at risk if they do get caught in this conflict?
Well, I think there's still a de-escalation ramp. So it's very possible that Iran could come back now to the United States and say, whoa, 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 we do want to talk. Please, right now, tell Israel to stop. Let's finish these negotiations. They could say that. Whether Israel stops or not is another matter. Where is the United States at risk? Bahrain, Qatar, bases in Iran, bases in Jordan. We've got a lot of assets in the region. We've also got ships at sea. And no one's mentioned the Straits of Hormuz. But if this escalates, Iran does have the capability, at least temporarily, to interrupt the supply of oil going back and forth. So whether they choose to do that or not, maybe they would if they thought it would make the difference in regime survival or not. So there's some regional diplomacy that we can expect to see playing out in the next few hours and the next couple of days. The states in the region, are they happy with the escalation? Do they want to say, let's finish them off right now? Well, Saudi Arabia has been actually working a rapprochement with Iran in recent months. So will they just say, now that's it, okay, finish them off? Or will they say a weakened regime in Tehran is preferable to chaos in Iran? And so let's get this stopped now. So there are other dynamics going here, simply beyond the military.
You talk about the different dynamics. How about, the proxy groups like the Houthis in Yemen? What's the likelihood that they'll be mobilized, they'll be used?
Well, we'll see what the United States does with Yemen. Right now, there's nothing really happening. The Yemenis have claimed they won, but they're not pushing their so-called success against U.S. forces. The United States should, but we don't know if it has, taken out the Iranian supply ships that were continuing to supply Yemen with the armaments they needed to attack. Yemen will be cut off in this. And I think Yemen will decide they want to sit this out, at least in the early days, and hope that they can survive. It's a tough piece of ground. For over 60 years, other forces have tried to invade and solve the problem of rebels and resistance in North Yemen. Nobody's been totally successful yet. So if you were with the Houthis, you might say, let's wait and see what happens. We can probably ride this out.
General, we have an Israeli official saying that Israel is preparing for an Iranian response in the coming hours. What's the most likely thing to happen in the next few hours, and what is the worst case scenario?
Well, I think it would be very surprising if Iran doesn't retaliate. But if the Israeli strikes were as effective as they say, and first information is usually wrong, but if they were that effective, maybe it's crippled Iran's ability to get the command and control necessary to launch a coordinated series of missile attacks. The worst case, maybe several hundred simultaneous ballistic missiles coming in on Israel, and maybe worse than that, some kind of dirty bomb with some non-fissile radioactive material in it that, if it pops on the ground, contaminates large sections of Israel. Iran has said that in this set of strikes previously, if there's another set, they're going after the Israeli nuclear capabilities. So I'm sure they're well protected, but that would be a risk also if those were hit, radiation were spread in Israel.
General, presumably we're that much closer to a regional development there, right?
That's right. But, the leaders in this region have lived with this tension for a long time. So there's a lot of careful calibration of what's going to happen next. People are going to watch. They're going to wait. One of the things that happened during the Biden administration was the United States lost a lot of credibility. We kept saying the key goal was not to escalate. And that was an invitation for various groups to escalate. Now, when President Trump came in, he came in with a big head of steam. And people thought, this is a tough man. He means what he says. And we did launch a lot of attacks in Yemen. But the record of the tariffs, the waffling on Ukraine, and the bobbing and weaving on the statements may have cost the United States some credibility in this case. So I think people are going to watch and wait before the region really gets involved.
General Clark, thank you so much for your time. General Wesley Clark, former NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and now. And of course, we have Bill Ferris with us as well. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. We continue to bring you developments in the Middle East. Iran state media now saying that multiple military sites in Tehran are being targeted. Iran Arak heavy water reactor facility is being targeted, according to the state media, along with Natanz nuclear site and surrounding facilities. Multiple military sites in Tehran, Parchin, a region in southeast of Tehran, housing multiple military facilities, also among those being targeted. Now, oil prices surging on fears of possible supply issues emanating from the conflict between Israel and Iran. Investors are also seeking out havens such as gold and treasuries. Avril Hung is here with more. Avril.
Yeah, Has, I mean, you've just been talking through how these military sites in Iran have been targeted, but note as well, as you know, that the nuclear sites, I think that's at the heart of the matter and how they've been targeted, along with the U.S. saying that they are not involved. How does this actually inform the chances we see of de-escalation? And I think oil traders are, in this regard, taking all this very seriously. They seem to be bracing for a long, drawn-out, protracted crisis. We saw earlier some of these Brent WTI futures spiking by levels we haven't seen in years. If you're looking at the front month contract, on the most active contract, spiking as much as, I think, 12% earlier. And the bigger point here is, given how extreme these levels are, it's not just about mass market dislocation. It's also about the potential that this could cause problems, not just for the markets, but also for businesses. Yet, if you take a look at what we're seeing in the haven plays and how they are catching a bit, including for the dollar, flip the board, please. It also begs the question, is this more just an oil issue? Is this more as an isolated to what we're seeing potentially from the supply dynamics? And I think MLive's Mark Cranfield also raised a really good point earlier that when it comes to, potentially what we're seeing as the U.S. pulling back on global leadership, is it longer term, more negative for the dollar? So we're seeing a haven bit for the greenback, but not by much. Has.
Avril, thank you. More insights on escalating conflict in the Middle East and what it means for global energy security. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. You're watching Inside. Of course, we're waiting for retaliation from Iran. It has promised to retaliate in the coming hours. In the meantime, Iran says it will deliver response to the planners as well as supporters of the attack. Jerusalem, meanwhile, says Tel Aviv light rails won't operate at all. And Israel's public transportation will be operating in a limited capacity. Of course, we're talking amidst expectations of that retaliation from Iran. Meantime, oil is surging after Israel's military strikes against targets in Iran, raising fears of fresh confrontations across the region that accounts for a third of global crude production. The risk of disruptions to supplies has put oil on course for the biggest weekly gain since 2022. A sustained gain in energy costs may fan global inflation, complicating the tasks facing central bankers as they navigate the fallout from the U.S.-led trade war. Now, joining us is Clayton, Seigle, Senior Fellow, and James Schlesinger, Chair in Energy and Geopolitics at CSIS. Also with us, Vandana, founder at Vanda Insights. Vandana, let's start with you. I mean, not surprising, we've seen that surge in oil prices.
No, not at all, Haslinda. So this is a rather explosive situation, as you were just mentioning. Israel, having launched a series of strikes against Iran, is expecting retaliation. And I think markets are expecting a retaliation as well. The big question for oil would be how and when Iran retaliates. On the second part, I would imagine they would want to keep an element of surprise, so probably not in the next few hours or even days. So this could drag on potentially, which means the risk premium that has crept into crude will also likely stay intact just as a precautionary measure. How Iran retaliates is probably a bigger question and probably harder to answer as well. I think what the US says and does in once they wake up and in the coming hours is going to be very critical to my mind, Haslinda, because the US has actually been carrying out nuclear negotiations with Iran. We know the Trump administration, President Donald Trump, wants peace in the Middle East. So will it step in to try and diffuse the situation? And if it does, we could see the risk premium evaporate very, very quickly. So I think that's what the markets will be waiting for to see next.
Clayton, what are you watching out for as tensions escalate? Of course, no one's really talking about the Straits of Hormuz right now.
Right, and that may be a mistake. That may be an oversight. We've been observing for the past couple of months that the oil market was a bit sanguine and maybe even a bit asleep at the wheel with regard for a scenario just like this, in which Israel were to escalate the situation. And then, as my colleague has alluded to, it's very important to see what will be the nature and the scope of Iran's response. And likewise, I think that the duration of this new phase of the conflict is really important with regard to the potential for an oil supply disruption. The longer this hot, active phase of war continues, the more likely that oil supply is likely to come under fire in this phase of this war between Israel and Iran. I think that oil faces two basic vectors of a potential disruption. One of them, as we've said, is from Iran's response. And I think a lot of that will depend on how Tehran perceives the threat has been coming also to include certain countries within the Gulf region. And likewise, the second vector is really more about Israel's own continuation of this phase of the war. Israel could decide, should this war continue, should they be determined to go after finishing the regime, to go after Iran's own oil resources, both in terms of production, maybe even domestic refining. That will ratchet up the escalation for the oil market much further than it is already.
We talk about potential supply disruptions, Vandana. What are you looking out for? What's possible? And how much capacity does OPEC have to fill in the gap?
Yeah, it's a range of potential scenarios and almost infinite if you try and map out all the ripple effects and the tit for tat retaliation and so on. So very broadly, when the market sees sort of a flashpoint and the current situation in the Middle East, you look at the region and you see that more than 30% of global oil supply, close to 31, 32 million barrels per day of oil, comes from that region. So if you are assuming as one potential outcome a wider disruption, so again, your other guest mentioned the Strait of Hormuz, which is about, conduit to 20% of global oil consumption every day. But a wider conflagration could mean disruption to supplies of all the major oil producing countries in the region. So that's what the market will be trying to price in. However, my base case is that, I think I expect a de-escalation. And I do not expect Trump to sit by and watch as perhaps a third war. We already have the two wars that he's been unable to bring peace to, and a third war erupting under his watch. But until and unless that happens, as I mentioned, let's see what Trump says and does. But until and unless that happens, I think the default mode for oil would be to try and price in all these horrific scenarios of all sorts of disruption to nearly a third of global oil supplies.
Of course, it's yet to play out, Clayton. We're just waiting for that response, retaliation from Iran. And JP Morgan has come out to say that if we do see a severe outcome, oil could get to $130 a barrel.
Well, we could certainly see oil prices spike back to triple-digit territory if indeed there is a material, I'm talking about a substantial disruption of oil supplies from the Gulf region and through the Strait of Hormuz. It's one possible outcome. And you asked a minute ago about the state of OPEC's involvement. So OPEC does currently hold some substantial spare capacity. probably 4 million barrels per day or so. On face value, that can easily cover volumetrically a full Iranian disruption of, let's say, 1.4, 1.5 million barrels per day. However, a larger disruption to those Gulf flows that my colleague alluded to, there's no way 20 million barrels per day could be offset by OPEC spare capacity or really any other spare capacity around the world. So we really have to look also at where that spare capacity is geographically located. It happens to be upstream of the Strait of Hormuz. So if there's a closure there, if there's a throttling of flows through that part of the maritime seaways, then some of that spare production capacity could have a hard time reaching market. And where is the substitute export route instead of the Gulf? Well, it's the Red Sea, which has not been a bastion of oil transport stability and security over the past couple of years. So there are a lot of geopolitical considerations and market considerations for us to think about tonight.
Yeah, thanks for picking up on that, Haslinda. I was just going to say I completely agree. The spare capacity within OPEC Plus is going to be cold comfort for the market, given that the vast majority of it sits in this region of potential flashpoint now.
I'm just wondering what it means for short-term and longer-term energy security. How might this play out, Clayton?
Well, naturally, the first thing to understand is whether oil assets and infrastructure and physical capabilities within the Gulf region are drawn into the fighting and potentially damaged by the fighting. That could be on, just for example, the Saudi side, the UAE side, other important producers across the Gulf from Iran could potentially be drawn into the fighting. I would agree with my colleague that it's not the base case at this time. And I believe that the recent visit to Tehran by the Saudi defense minister was probably intended to convey the signal that they want to stay out of any future conflagration and that they appreciate the rapprochement, the sort of détente that Saudi Arabia and Iran have had in the last 3 years. And they'd like to see that continue. So at least that is a bit of a glass half full interpretation of how the region might respond going forward.
We have a response from Oman at this point in time. Oman saying that Israel's Iran attack was reckless and dangerous escalation to the situation in the Middle East. So we're beginning to see the response from the neighboring countries in the Middle East. As you take a look, Vandana, of the oil market, what next for you? What's essential? What essentially are you looking out for?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, a retaliation is to be expected. I do not see that happening in the next few hours, potentially not even in the next few days. Iran will try and retain the surprise element, basically to keep Israel and the rest of the world guessing as to how and when exactly it will retaliate. I do expect my base case is that Iran will err on the side of retaliating directly towards Israel and avoid dragging in the other Middle Eastern powers, or more than dragging in to have them sort of on the opposite side as well. I don't think Iran would want to do that or could afford to do that. I also see the Middle Eastern powers, aside from the US, also trying to prevail on Iran, especially, and try to diffuse the situation. So that's my base case. But what that ends up being is that the next few several days, potentially weeks, something similar to what we saw last April and October when Israel and Iran launched direct strikes on each other, is that we have this sort of situation festering and simmering away potentially for the next few weeks, keeping this risk premium intact. There is a slight chance that Trump somehow, waves a magic wand and is able to completely diffuse the situation very, very quickly, maybe encourages Iran to go ahead, get done with its retaliation, but do it in a very, very limited, symbolic manner. Again, something similar to what we saw last year, in which case this could all evaporate and return to calm very, very quickly. At this point, it's a coin toss, Haslinda. I don't know which way the situation goes.
Clayton, we're already seeing the tit-for-tat conversations and comments from both sides. Netanyahu now saying that the opening attack on Iran was very successful. Iran saying that Israel's attack could not have been done without the U.S., in fact. So we're seeing that tit-for-tat response. I mean, realistically, this is likely to be a long, drawn process.
I do think that we are in a new chapter here, and unlike the April and the October flare-ups that we saw with tit-for-tat attacks between the two sides last year that were, in a way, kind of telegrammed in advance, and the sides signaling that they did not intend to escalate the situation. We're in a new chapter now, and this is a much more comprehensive military operation by the Israeli Defense Forces against Iran, many more targets, many more types of targets. And you asked a minute ago a really important question about the medium term, and so how this plays out. If the result of this, wherever the dust settles, is that Iran abandons the non-proliferation treaty and it accelerates its path toward developing nuclear capabilities and potentially nuclear weapons capabilities, then we could see a further escalation in the region and really a shakeup in the balance of power, where Iran has more of a deterrent capability, which was certainly eroded when Israel was able to degrade the capabilities of Hezbollah.
Right. Clayton, Vandana, thank you so much for your insights today. A very important conversation right there. Of course, we heard Iran saying that the Israel attack could not have happened without the U.S. And now Netanyahu also saying that the public may need to be in shelters for an extended period of time. Clayton Seigle, senior fellow there with Vandana earlier on, giving their assessment on the energy market. Now, still to come, one black box retrieved after the crash of an Air India Boeing 787 as investigations intensify into what went wrong. We'll get you a live update from our reporter in Ahmedabad next. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. India has just kicked off its trading day. Let's do a check on how Tata Group stocks are doing at this point in time on the back of that Air India plane coming down just minutes after taking off on Thursday. Of course, Tata Motors took control of Air India in 2022. Tata Consultancy and along with the other Tata Group stocks are trading in negative territory. We have Indian hotels as well down by more than 1%. Interglobe Aviation slumping at 5% from the get-go. We know that the rear black box has been recovered from the crashed Air India location at this point in time. One of two Air India black boxes have been recovered, according to some reports. Now, the Hindustan Times says one of the black boxes has been recovered from the wreckage of the Air India jet that crashed in Ahmedabad, killing all but one of the 242 people on board. Bloomberg's PR Sanjay is in Ahmedabad and joins us now for the very latest. Sanjay, what do we know?
Hi, I'm at the site. Saddest days for Indian civil aviation, and now at any time Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to visit the crash site, and he's also expected to visit the civil hospital. Yesterday, India's Home Minister had the site, and he had made a statement, and there are DNA tests are being already progressing to identify the deceased bodies, and the death toll is not yet to be ascertained because it is not just passengers, because it is crashed into a residential area where the medical college hostel is there, and we could see a lot of victims there, a lot of kiosks over there, a lot of sad scenes are progressing over here, and we are expecting, and that's Air India CEO Wilson Campbell is also there. He's gone inside the accident site. He's still inside. He's yet to come, and we are expecting Tata Air India CEO to make a statement on. And of course, they've already announced the compensation, and we are waiting for more details from Air India's chairman. And we are yet to get a solid confirmation on the two in the second black box as per the media reports. But we are waiting for an official confirmation investigation on the the black box. Okay.
Sanjay, thank you so much for that. Bloomberg's PR Sanjay in Ahmedabad. Let's get insights, perspective. Mark Martin, founder and CEO at Aviation Specialists, Martin Consulting. Mark, good to have you with us. I'm just wondering what your initial thoughts are, because we know there's been, no fire, and that, the initial videos show that the jet landing gear was not retracted. I mean, how are you assessing at this point in time?
Morning, Haslinda. Thanks so much for having me. A dark day and probably the worst air disaster in over 30 years in the history of aviation, at least as we know it. From what we know of the incident is that he got airborne. He was at about 500 feet. And from what it looks like, again, without going into any speculation, is that he lost both engines while he needed that maximum continuous thrust, or MCT, to climb out and hit his climb cruise speed. And his engines clearly appear to have let him down at 500 feet. And when you're at 500 feet, you have no option to just pretty much come down and slam yourself into the ground. And what's really unfortunate is that if you really were to look at what happened, could we have saved more lives, and could we have improved the survivability? The answer is yes, but if you go to any airport in Europe, you find most airports in the middle of nowhere with just fields and no habitation, no urbanization, population, or anything. But airports in India are crammed and smashed with residential properties, high-rise buildings, office blocks, and and this is exactly what we're seeing. Clearly you're just flying into buildings and killing yourself and everybody around you. So it's extremely unfortunate. And this should have never happened. And clearly, this investigation, Haslinda, is now a global affair. We've got the UKCA on board, the NTSB, the FAA, the European Aviation Safety Agency. Every country in the world that operates the 787 has sent our safety delegation to investigate this. And the reason why is because this is the world's first ever 787 Dreamliner crash. And everybody wants to know why it happened. There were 52 British nationals on board. There were Canadian nationals on board, Americans, right, Austrians, and Germans. So it's going to be a global affair.
Questions also about Air India's fleet. We know that they're pretty old. In fact, there's twice the age of, rivals like Indigo, which was founded 18 years ago. What are you making of that? Is there a reason to question about the age of the fleet?
Absolutely, yes. Air India was owned by the government, and Air India got a lot of criticism because of government control and being run by unions. Well, guess what? In 2021, Air India was sold to a private company, the Tatas, and Tatas took on Singapore Airlines with a 24% equity holding. So Air India is, the entire management control of Air India is run and driven by Singapore Airlines. It's been 4 years since this happened, Haslinda, and there should have been major changes in the structure of the airline. Branding really wasn't important. You didn't have to, branding was not the problem of Air India. The problem was broken aircraft, broken seats, engines which never worked, engines that had vibration, labs that were just not working at all, bad maintenance practices. This should have been the priority of Singapore Airlines and Tata, but what they did is they just rebranded it and started inducting Airbus A350s, hoping like hell that the remaining fleet starts to phase out with the induction of new, and that's never going to happen. We all know the airline business that when you take over a new company or an airline, you need to fix the skeletons in the cupboard. You need to get there, uproot all the evils and the madness, recreate it, restructure it, realign the whole organization, and then induct our aircraft, and then possibly do a rebranding. So it's been completely reversal. And like I said, this investigation is right, going to hold those accountable, everybody, whether it's the crew, the maintenance, whatever that happened. I mean, it's a global investigation now, so we can't dodge this one or brush it under the carpet.
You talk about maintenance. Of course, this is an industry that's been saddled with supply chain disruptions. Also, when it comes to Boeing, this is yet another problem for its new CEO.
Yeah, Kelly Ortberg has been struggling with a lot. He's been dealing with a whole lot of madness. The FAA has shut down Boeing's production lines. Yesterday, Boeing stock took a 12% hit in morning trade. What we know so far is that, and what's factually correct here, Haslinda, is that the 787, has been one of their best aircraft ever produced. The 787 compares itself with the Airbus A350. It's a next generation aircraft. It's fiber optic. It's fully digital. It's got a server on board. It's one of the best. And I don't think fundamentally the aircraft failed in this, unless the investigation proves me wrong. But what I would like to see is that investigation is absolutely unbiased, neutral, and with the intent of truly improving safety. Because 787 from its Carolina plant has had production line issues. Yes, we know that. We've had manufacturing quality, but the aircraft, the aircraft stuck together. It did well. It performed well. It's flown a lot. It's a reliable aircraft. It's one of the best out there. So I don't think the aircraft has fundamentally failed or there's been a catastrophic failure with the aircraft, but there's something more that meets the eye. It's got to be with engine power or clearly there was no thrust to help the aircraft continue climbing.
Mark, thank you so much for that. Mark Martin, founder and CEO at Martin Consulting. Now, we have some lines from the IRNA. Iran says that there's been no damage to its oil refineries as well as storage tanks, and that's according to the IRNA. We continue to monitor developments in the Middle East on the back of that attack from Israel on Iran. Well, that is it for Insight. Horizons, Middle East and Africa is next. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg.